Hi, my name is Alain Sylvain. I'm the CEO of Sylvain Labs. I'm here today to talk about the inherent rebellion of Gen Z and what it means to the future of work. By way of introduction, Sylvain Labs is a strategy and design consultancy. We help companies think about the future of their products and brands. We're offices in New York, Amsterdam, and Richmond, insofar that offices even matter anymore. And we're a certified B Corporation. So let's start with the fundamental question. Who are Gen Z? And it makes me think of this image right here, where, here we are, a bunch of old people kind of looking in the fishbowl and looking at Gen Z from the outside and studying them like we're on safari, and it's pretty funny because I remember having those same conversations when millennials entered the workforce. It was this really we were gawking at them, thinking about what made them tick. And what the irony is that Gen Z actually shapes so much of our collective behaviors. They shape the mainstream. They shape the issues that are making it to the political agenda of the day, or they're shaping the content that we're sharing from a pop culture point of view. As a result, there's this collective fascination over Gen Z. There are books written, they're on covers of magazines. The generation itself seems to capture everything that society's grappling with as a whole. That's why you see reports written that are dissecting them like they're really under a microscope. And there's some things that you'll find uniformly true, in these sorts of reports and these sorts of analyses. One thing is this doom and gloom that Gen Z is glued to technology, and it's ultimately will be the result in their demise, that they're too addicted to technology. We gawk, the outsiders looking in, we gawk at their diversity and shocked by their multiracial and alternative identities. The truth is, Gen Z, if you look at it, what they can do, they're actually a force to be reckoned with. They're very kind of politically minded and extroverted, and they are here to stay. So what does that mean for work? First, let's take a big step back and let's think about youth in general. Because all teens, all young people have this kind of rebellious undertone. Whether you go as far back, millennia it's existed. Think about Pablo Picasso there on the left, who dropped out of school, and same with Cyndi Lauper, and Katharine Hepburn dressing in men's clothes, smoking cigarettes. Bill Gates, the coolest thing he ever did was get arrested. Teens inherently have some rebellion, and I embarrassingly have this too. It took a lot of rebellion to try to grow a goatee at the age of 17. It's in our biology actually. It's in a neuroscientific makeup that teens are driven to be more rebellious. It's actually, there are parts of the brain that are further developed than others when it comes to teens. The rational side of the brain is actually not as developed as more of the impulsive side of the brain. Teens actually default to more risk and adventure because it's just part of their biology, and it's also just pure part of their psychology in the way they view themselves and what they want to express and become in the world. They're literally finding out who they are in that very moment. And what you'll see is over generations, each generation has in some way been rebellious. In the 50s, you saw a rebellion against innocence and Puritanism, if you want to say that. You saw singers swinging their hips from side to side. You saw this devil's music in rock and roll. Black music was making it to the collective fore. And so there was a revolt against innocence. In the 60s, you saw a revolt more towards authority and the man and being square. The idea that anyone over 30 was actually evil. Gen Z had their own rebellion in this kind of anti-establishment where everything alternative was cool and right. Whether you're talking about slackers or punk rock, or I should say alternative rock, or gangster rap. Those are all anti-establishment movements that were captured by Gen Z. Millennials were interesting because they too were rebellious, but rebellious towards the common conventional idea of adulthood, the idea that you're getting married at a certain age, you're going to have a steady job, you're going to buy a house, kind of those conventional milestones. were really challenged by millennials, and what it means to be an adult was challenged by millennials. With this generation, they clearly have a new sense of rebellion. And in fact, the Pentagon is preparing for a potential domestic terrorist threat driven by Gen Z. It's like for real. Like Gen Z is a political force to be reckoned with. And they've reimagined what rebellion can actually be. It's not just random and abstract. It actually comes from a very, very authentic place. Gen Z was born in crisis. They're native to crisis in the way that we used to say millennials are digitally native. Many of them, the oldest ones, were born in the years coming out of 9/11 and in this kind of terrorist world. This idea of you see something, say something. That's the status quo for many Gen Z people. Or they lived through the financial recession. Maybe they lost their homes. Maybe their parents lost their job. They see gun shootings at schools on a regular basis, and the greater desensitization to violence. Many of them only know Donald Trump as president. In a way, they were only conscious about presidency, and they only know Donald Trump. If people born and saw the Obama election, maybe they have a sense of optimism. If people were born and only saw the Donald Trump election, like what do they see? Is my question. Maybe they're not have that same sense of openness. They also lived through this crisis, the COVID crisis, and it's forced them to reevaluate health, life, community, family. And some of them only know school at home, if you think about it this way, and they will only know schooling with a great amount of like home education through a computer, interacting with their peers via the screen or their teachers via the screen. Like, could you imagine how different your world is when you're looking at it through the lens of a computer screen? And then, of course, Gen Z, many people think terrorism is to millennials as is the climate crisis is to Gen Z. That it is that big and it's that informative about how they live. Here's a great quote. So we stepped into the world as it was starting to fall apart. It's caused my generation to have a vastly different perspective than the people just a few years ahead of us or behind us. Gen Z only knows a world where things are not making sense and things are falling apart. And they're looking around like, what are we going to do about this? Like, hasn't something been done already? And they're looking to the rest of us to really do something about it. Now, you add to that they're looking at it through the lens of technology. And technology to them is not something that they venture to. It's more than native to them. It's part of the way they blink their eyes. A new humanity has been born from this technology. Technology has brought a new sense of collective identity and collective connectedness. For example, Gen Z are looking out through their phone and they're seeing, wildfires in Australia. They're seeing, political coups in one part of the world. They're seeing everything that's possible, whether that's right down the street from them or the opposite side of the world. Through technology, they have a greater savviness and awareness of what's happening in the world. They also have a greater sense of collective identity, as I said. We think in terms of we. When I go to the polls, I'm not just thinking about the people who live on my street. I'm thinking about the people who I'm connected to on social media from all around the world. There's a shared identity. There's a sense that there's no individual, actually. And this idea of being an individual has been a large part of Western civilization for generations. This is the first time you're really starting to see the sense of collective care, and that Gen Z views it a sense of responsibility for taking care of their neighbor. That's why they're kind of going further in their own personal pursuits and looking to create businesses and create content and be much more active on a more public and exposed level. So if in the 50s, youth were anti-innocence, and in the 60s, youth were anti-authorities, and Gen X was anti-establishment, and millennials went on to become anti-adulthood, I believe that Gen Z are pro-change. That they're actually not anti-anything per se. They're not trying to take anything down. They're not anarchists. They're actually activists in that they're trying to be progressive. They're trying to move society forward. And if you think about the people that we're really looking to and congratulating to right now, the Greta Thunbergs and Malalas, they are of this generation, and they're kind of writing the political agenda of the day. And you would think, TikTok is this frivolous tool that is just fun and kids dancing, but actually even that has been hacked in a way to be a political extension of Gen Z themselves. And so they've become change hackers. They are hacking change, and they're out being very proactive about that change. And you think about the little minor stunts that have been done against Donald Trump in emptying his rallies. Or in this case, someone bought $100,000 worth of Donald Trump baseballs only to keep them in the shopping cart so no one else can buy them. These little acts of rebellion are subtle and crafty and savvy, and they rely on digital knowledge. It's pretty impressive. Or in Hong Kong, you saw Gen Z protest the Chinese government virtually in a game. They went into Animal Crossing and they conducted a real protest there with torches and people coming together. So much so that the game got taken down. So, what does change hacking mean at work? How does that apply at work? It's an important question to ask because Gen Z, they're going to reach a whole new level of influence at work. For the first time, we're going to have 5 different generations entering within the workforce at once. Millennials, they were kind of pampered at work. They've got free lunches, ping pong tables, sabbaticals. That was the response to millennials. For Gen Z, I think if millennials were sort of shunned the system in pursuit of their own personal purpose, Gen Z is hacking the system in pursuit of collective progress. For them, work is a medium. Work is something they use to solve their desire to change the world. Work is actually an extension of that pursuit. And so, think about how they're behaving when they're entering school and entering the workforce. Many are not looking to liberal arts educations and the humanities anymore. They're not majoring in that stuff. They're majoring in much more specific and sort of vocational trades, or things like science and literal things that can create some action. They're not studying why, they're studying how. So what's the role of employers? Employers are allies. In the way that we're talking about white people being allies to black people in this post-George Floyd era, employers are in a way allies to Gen Z in that they're listening, they're supportive, they're humble. That's the new relationship between employers and Gen Z. A lot of people are impressed by the fact that Gen Z have drawn a line in the sand when it comes to who they want to work for and who they don't want to work for. And it turns out there are many companies they don't want to work for purely for political reasons. And they're not afraid to clap back. There's this great parliamentarian that responded to a heckler by saying, "Okay, boomer." "Okay, boomer" in itself is an act of rebellion. They're not afraid to clap back. The Gen X is often viewed as the Karen generation, in that Gen X is entitled and privileged and has had it easily. Gen Z is not afraid to call those things out. In fact, not only are they critical, they're also open-hearted in that they see potential and they align themselves with potential and creative brilliance. And they're finding allies within the employer world, within the greater adult community. We shouldn't be asking, how will Gen Z work for us? We should be asking, how can we work with Gen Z? It's that simple. It's that simple because when you think of it that way, when you think, okay, this person's working with me in the pursuit of their own sense of what collective progress is, you change the relationship of the employer and the employee. So that's my story on Gen Z. Next time, check me out in a few years. You'll bring me back to talk about Generation Alpha. Next thing, they're going to change the world. In the meantime, my name is Alain, CEO of Sylvain Labs. Thanks for listening.